Human history has certain kinds of cycles in it. Like I've talked about the long-term debt cycle, perhaps. I think I have in the past. In any case, in a fractional reserve banking system, money is lent into existence, right? And the principal is lent out, but the interest that ultimately has to be paid back is not lent out. So there's never enough money out in the system to pay back all the loans plus interest. So it eventually has a problem because it has to grow infinitely. And the price level is a function of like the amount of dollars that are out there relative to the number of goods that they can purchase. Times the velocity of money. So interest is compounding. So the interest can quickly reach a point. There's a point where it can just hyperinflate. That's happened a lot of times. There's not a single fiat currency regime that has existed for more than 100 years. Ours is in its early 50s, since Nixon closed the gold window. So they eventually crash. Something happens where too much debt is created. It's like the temptation to plunder. Too much money is put out into circulation, then it's more than the economy can back up with GDP. And so it dilutes the currency. And that can happen to the point where there's hyperinflation. There's just so many dollars chasing not as many goods, and you get this hyperinflation. And then the currency crashes and you have to reset it somehow. They might reset it to gold. After the French Revolution, the central bank, they created something called an assignat. It's like a type of fiat currency. This is from a book called Fiat Inflation in France. And I got this from Manico64. He's a great channel on monetary economics and such. But it was backed by all of the land that they stole from the church. So they confiscated all this church property, but eventually they debased it to the point where there was hyperinflation. And inflation, an inflationary cycle, it can create a lot of social problems, as you can imagine. People turn to vice. I'll just leave it at that without getting too detailed. People turn to vice. So this monetary, and ultimately, wars can be precipitated from this type of a hardship. And it's been said that war has been used as a means to get out of such an economic conundrum. It's like these long-term debt cycles are punctuated by human tragedies. So the thing about the cyclicality of human history is that though conditions change, the hardware of the human beings doesn't change. But if depending on when you were born in that cycle, you can get the idea, or you can believe in the illusion of human progress. Not human technological progress, but somehow that we are inherently better equipped than our predecessors. I believed that. I guess it was like just sort of the acceleration of technology in my early years. Just not having the experience or an understanding of history. But I looked at things like athletics, and I saw that just it seemed like human beings were just getting better and better and better. And that, like, you looked at pictures of athletes from past eras, and they really couldn't measure up. But now I look at it and I realize that there are just so many other factors. It was just things that were augmenting the human being, like the Flynn effect of better diet equaling bigger, stronger, faster person. Also, just more egalitarianism. The world has become a lot more egalitarian than it ever was. Now, I know that there's extremes in the world. There are places of extreme repression, and then there are places of great freedom and prosperity. But for the most part, there are places where maybe you would get in prison for speaking out against the regime. Yeah, there's probably places you would get killed, but those places are not as many as they used to be. So this egalitarianism allows a greater talent pool to be exploited. And so you take, for example, like the Olympic Games. One of the reasons why the Soviets were so hard to compete against was because they could, I think, their population was more evenly subject to those opportunities to participate, say, in athletics. Whereas in, say, the United States, it takes discretionary income to develop a child. Like it's done more with like private funds, whereas in the Soviet Union they could find the talent and develop it, and it didn't matter like what family that talent came from. So I think that, and also and this goes along with the illusion of human progress, but performance enhancing drugs. So I think when I was a kid, I understood that there was steroids, but I didn't understand like how ubiquitous they were becoming in everything, and how that just levels everyone up. Everything that human beings get involved with, they take it to just the extreme. Like you go from door slamming stock cars to now these like hollow tube frame go-kart things that just have a like a Lexan looking body or something on it, like a remote control car almost. Anyway, this illusion of progress, I just thought that it kind of applied to other things as well, like other parts of human expression. Like somehow we were becoming more intelligent. Well, we were developing better tools. But the thing is if you read the great minds of history, it dispels the illusion that we're any more capable. And by the same token, we're really no more moral either. The morality of human beings in any time and place, it doesn't go monotonically up or down. It's just goes like on a random walk, possibly, maybe cyclical, but it definitely varies. People have been more or less depraved. We're not on any real frontier. We just have technology to amplify it more, and the ability to create a larger population. I think it could be argued that given that the mind has plasticity, it's malleable. Even in adults, you can reshape your neural pathways. You develop those things, that the mind is developed through use. And the thinkers in past times, though they be from a smaller talent pool, their minds were probably shaped quite differently than ours. In the same way that an archaic human, their life would shape them very differently. So, like, in terms of brute strength, there'd be no way that, like, I could take on, like, a Neanderthal, or probably even a Cro-Mag. Their nervous system is probably more, like, open and able to fire muscles than ours. So by the same token, the nervous system and the brain, all that, it's all connected. You've probably seen the picture of the human being that's been stripped of everything but, like, the eyes, the brain, and the whole nervous system. It's all just like one tree of nerves. So just as, like, the Neanderthal man or the primitive man probably has a more developed network of nerves and musculature, somebody like Newton or Leibniz, Euler, Gauss, their brains were probably just so much more developed. So it does make me wonder what they could do with the tools that we've developed today, or what we could do in terms of, there's probably, like, tiger moms who are creating children like this in places. I know that term is kind of exclusive to Chinese, but I'm trying to generalize it. There's, there's just a bigger talent pool as well. But there is no real change in the human being. Like, we're not superior to our predecessors in terms of the hardware. It's just, technology and egalitarianism, opportunities for, exploiting a larger talent pool. That's always going to create greater superlatives, expose more outliers. This thing I've been noticing lately is just, when you're smarter than average, you still do really stupid things. And you think to yourself, if I can do things this stupid, how do any of us survive? And I think I'm just smart enough to occasionally see when somebody's about to make the wrong decision. Like, you can see they're about to do something, it's the wrong decision. And you just have to like watch it happen. Like, sometimes it's in driving, you'll see it in traffic. Sometimes you see it on a big scale. Like, you see decision makers just coming up with ways to just overly complicate life, and like not understanding that they, by fiat, can really impose hardship on people. I was listening to a podcast today, and one of the topics that came up was drugs, prescription drugs. And it seems like in the United States, they're just ridiculously expensive. But I think the reason for that, it's like we are subsidizing everybody else in a sense. My impression is that countries put price controls on drugs. And in a vacuum, to cap the price of a thing will cause a shortage. So if there was like a one world drug economy, if you cap the price of drugs, as certain governments do, most governments do, I think. United States, I guess we don't. We have. I think we did it with insulin, maybe epinephrine. But if you don't, if you cap the price of drugs, there'll be a shortage, because there won't be enough of a P times V, the summation thereof. Like, the market won't be big enough to support, the infrastructure. So it would have to scale down somehow. But if you had several different players, different economies, and say all but one price capped the medications, these are the same multinational corporations, these drug companies, they sell their drugs all over the world. So they can only get certain price for them in countries where it's capped. But in the United States, it's like they make up for all that. So, I don't know how that gets addressed, but, there's like tons of people who go to Mexico to get their drugs. So it's really just evidence of it. So I don't know where I was going with that, but I was talking about just people making really bad decisions, and you can see it coming, unfortunately. I think that oftentimes bad decisions are not wholly a function of insufficient intellect. Sometimes it's an impulsiveness, a failure to just stop and examine the options. Just knowing that, to do that, just to pause sometimes when you're at a intersection of some kind, and really evaluate the merits of each option, and then think about the downstream consequences. Just doing that has occasionally saved me from trouble, and the opposite. There have been times when I've just done something without thinking about it. I don't know. It's like, I saw a video. It's kind of viral. It was a woman who, for whatever reason, there was a child on a horse being guided by professionals, and it was on a public trail, and this woman, it was caught on film, just snuck up like mischievously behind the horse that had a child on it and pulled the horse's tail. Now, she's been arrested, but I just can't fathom what was going through that person's mind. Do they live in a dream world where, like, there's no consequences? Or are they like a psychopath who, like, actually thought they were going to do something evil? Like, I can't imagine that. I think it's just a person who just can't see, like, a couple steps beyond what they're doing, what could happen, like that domino effect, the potential consequences. There's just that pausing isn't there. So it's not just intellectual potential. It's just like the mindfulness to use it, just to stop and use it. So another part of that, though, is your own happiness, like how intrinsically happy you are is going to influence your decisions, your actions. Like, if you have a lot of neediness in you, it's going to create a lot of, like, situations where you're like trying to push a spaghetti noodle. Things you don't have the contentment to just kind of sit back and let things come to you. In a sense, like, you can chase too hard if you're too needy. And the source of that neediness, it's kind of unintuitive. I've talked about it before. It's an unknown opportunity cost. Neediness arises. It is from. It's a thing that's not. It has an effect. It's a thing that can be noticed, but it has an effect that's not intuitive, and it's just the voice in your head. That's what all the spiritual teachers who are aware of this, who aren't just talking to invisible beings about whom books are written, that inner narrative, that voice in the head, that not only causes suffering, but it precludes peace. And there's more to peace than just like the satisfaction one gets at the end of an honest day's work. That's a good kind of peace. But this is like a peace that's palpable, that radiates from the midst of your being, and is not a function of circumstance. When that state persists, there's terms for it. I've said it before, but one of the terms would be sahaja samadhi, like a walking samadhi. There's like a spaciousness. Whereas, initially when there was a perception of the energy body, it could be quite uncomfortable because of blockages and accumulations, concentrations. But when it is balanced in the spiritual heart and that I has kind of sunken back into that spiritual heart, It's no longer reaching out for things all the time. It's because it's no longer seen as self, so it's no longer a relational agent. So all of the ideas that were constantly, 40,000 thoughts a day, 90,000 thoughts a day, those were disconnected from, and they just sort of wither away. And it leaves a great space and a great contentment, a peace beyond understanding, to be inhabited by the truth of this moment versus all kinds of other ideas about it. From that state of being, there's less desperation. There's more ability for discretion. Things are done on a more discretionary basis, meaning they're just optional. Things are enjoyed without being pined for. And bad decisions are avoided because it's understood that they will bring about a proliferation of just like delusion, duality, just getting sucked into things, or at least going through the motions, because it's like a thing that can't be unseen, right? Like I've said before, the old analogy that it's like the rope in the dark room, and you think it's a snake, and then there's lightning or a flash of light comes on, you see that's not a snake, you see it's a rope. You can't be afraid of it again like that. So the thing is, you can still get yourself caught up in things that are inconvenient. And you still may feel the impetus to deal with them. But everything I say, it comes from my experience, and I have made some very bad decisions. And I can say with 100% certainty that my bad decisions came from a neediness, from being cut off from source, cut off from the truth. So it doesn't mean I don't make mistakes, but I don't make the kind of mistakes where I think I'm going to get something like out of a relationship, or where somebody's going to bring something to me that's too good to be true. It doesn't mean I can't be tricked, but it just means that there's just not a great hunger there, because the product of every object of desire it's less than what appears in the absence of its pursuit. I talk a lot about how that happens in my videos. And I have written a book, it's out on Amazon. I mentioned that on my talk with Collective Dismal. But it's curative consciousness for heartbreak, obsession, and process addiction. And it's out on Amazon. It's kind of hard to find, but it's gotten some good reviews. I basically wrote it in the midst of this discovery. this shift in reality and shift in the perception of reality. And this idea that if it changes the way that you behave, and there was a process by which it happened, it would be good to share that information. Now, it could well be that what I describe in the book is just like the tip of the iceberg. Like, it's possible that my life conditioned me to be in a place, like energetically, where it would be possible to kind of fracture the egoic structure. Like, everybody's different. Everybody's life is different. People maybe have suffered traumas and it's changed the shape of their brain, or somebody who just physically, like, there's different kinds of yoga, right? So there's like Raja yoga. It's kind of like, I think the word Raja is royal, but it's more of the like the inner work. But then there's Hatha yoga, and that's more of asanas and the physical aspect of it. And I have seen yogis that were very physically developed, and I think it's through isometrics and functional strength, but isometric type things. Well, that develops the nervous system. So some of these people have developed a nervous system that's not average, not like the default, typical, undeveloped. But I have been training weights since I was 14 years old. And like, I've never stopped, and I'm 50. So I think perhaps like the energy systems in me like have maybe been developed. I don't know how I would feel if I never like physically developed myself. So I don't know energetically if, it takes it's like a pimple where it takes like a certain amount of pressure, like energetically, for that to happen. So like, I don't know if the things that I describe in my book, the practices, if they would even matter. But they are corroborated through the teachings of many different teachers. So I think there's a lot of conditions that can go into it. Like I've said before, how Ramana Maharshi described people as being like wood, like with varying levels of dampness, making them more or less quick to ignite when exposed to flame. So, and I think Eckhart Tolle was talking about in his book, The Power of Now, which is a great book, at least for me. Some people would read that book and it would be like the most profound thing they ever read. And then other people would read it and just think it was gobbledygook. In fact, I came across kind of a review of that book, but long after it was written. But it was a psychologist, a licensed clinical therapist, something like that. Anyway, he has a huge channel. You might know who I'm talking about. I don't like to name names, but his last name means big in another language. And he was in that camp of, this is like gobbledygook. But the thing that I don't get is there is some merit to the idea of being present. Like I've talked about this before, about how there's a part of your brain that does not know the difference between a thought and reality. Like, you can test it yourself, right? And people have so many thoughts every day. And that part of the brain that doesn't know the difference, every once in a while, it's going to get triggered by some thought. Or there's going to be a circumstance that offends a notion that's held in mind, that's also based on thought, but it triggers the endocrine system and it creates stress hormones. And I mean, he just made fun of it, which I can see there's certain things, like every school of spirituality or whatever seems to have in it some like mysticism, some stuff, everything is the mind. You can't trust anything that is perceived. Everything is like psychosomatic. Like even the state of like sahaja samadhi or whatever is probably the vagal nerve or something. I'm just saying, combined with being present and reshaping one's neural pathways. But there's real benefit. Like, you can really change the way that you perceive reality. And this creator just, I don't know, they didn't acknowledge it in any way, shape, or form. But there is merit to it. And I can see how the shift in perception could conjure mystical traditions and things, and how that can be abused in various ways, because despite the fact that people have these changes, they are rare. So there's many more people involved in these things than people who have been really changed by them. And I think it's all relative. It's really hard to gauge how much you've been changed relative to somebody else. You can only know how much you've been changed relative to yourself. But somebody who's like a really hardcore atheist, like, or a materialist, not so much an atheist, but like a materialist, somebody who really thinks Newtonian physics really practically describes like everything. And yeah, there's some things we don't understand at sort of the subatomic level or whatever, quantum entanglement, stuff like that. But for the most part, like, we've got it figured out, I would say to go through this type of a change could change one's views on that perhaps there's something a little unexpected, unknown. I don't know, there's things that are just really mysterious in the world, like, I don't know, like holons. A holon is like, just in layman's terms, like a sort of a seemingly autonomous part of a larger system that is also itself autonomous. So like a white blood cell, I guess, like was it a phagocyte or something like that? Like it looks like an amoeba. It has some agency. And like cells, apparently, when they're starting to die, they try to mitigate, they try to survive, they try to they mutate, apparently. And like that can cause potential problems for transplants and things, like cancer can come from those mutations. But the point is that every little thing wants to survive. There's just an impetus, like just to stay conscious, just to stay alive, no matter what happens, to try to stay alive. Even the little parts of systems try to do that. So that implies that there is some kind of sensory, there's some kind of feedback going on. There's an awareness to even these things that we don't think of as intelligent. They still have like a way to know. They sort of have an opinion of sorts, like, and that opinion is that they want to live. They want to keep doing what they've been doing. Where does that come from? And then like morphogenetic fields, like there's DNA, right? And that supposedly has all the instructions for us in it. But those cells become specialized, and everything has to know where to go. Like in the creating of a human being, there's like a template for it, I guess, a field, a morphogenetic field, and it's filled by the organism. I'm kind of just talking out of my ass right now, but you can check out this stuff and tell me if you agree. Anyway, have a good one.